Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, as you saw by the title, I want to talk about what type of reptiles you should avoid getting when you're going to an expo. This comes from personal experience, this comes from seeing the experiences of other people, this comes from having gone to plenty of expos, and I don't go to like too many now, but I've gone to more back in the day, and the only ones I go to now are like the really big ones because your girl likes some discounted cork bark, okay? Like, I love getting discounted cork bark, and Tinley Park I always get it at, so that's where I go every year. But people who are like new to keeping reptiles or who like keep a bunch of reptiles, they go to expos often, and these are just some tips I would recommend if you're new or if you've gone many times about how to avoid certain types of reptiles. And we're going to talk about three major things. So avoiding wild-caught reptiles, avoiding reptiles that are problematic morphs or problematic types, and then also avoiding hybrids, which that one is a little bit more of a controversial topic, but we'll get to that one last because I feel like it's least important compared to the first two, but still worth discussing. So first and foremost, let's talk about keeping a wild-caught reptiles or experiencing them at expos. Now, I have a lot of feelings when it comes to people keeping wild-caught reptiles. I'll include a video up here about my feelings on it if you're interested, but that's not the video for this, that's the video up there. So I think that it's best to avoid wild-caught reptiles at expos because they can harbor diseases. They can pass diseases to your other reptiles, and when you buy them you are getting them at like a cheaper price typically, and that can be the draw to a lot of people, but you'll end up having to pay way more if they're sick or if they get your other reptiles sick, and they can carry things with them that can end up killing them, and then you have put a lot of money into this reptile that is now no longer alive and would have been had it been kept in the wild. And by paying for them, you're also supporting the people that take them from the wild. So one thing you have to think about is this animal wild caught, and how do I know? So when you go to an expo, a lot of times you will see breeders, and you can tell they're breeders straight away because they have like a big sign that introduces who they are. I'll give you an example. Josh's Frogs. Josh's Frogs is a breeder of reptiles and amphibians, and when you go to their booth, there's a big Josh's Frog sign, and all of their animals are on display there in pretty similar ways. Then you have things like booths that don't really have a big sign, and they have like a huge array and variety of reptiles, and they're all kept in different types of containers. Some of them are kept in like display enclosures, some of them are kept in just like deli cups and stuff, but they have like a huge variety, like not just like a few types of geckos, a few types of frogs. Typically a breeder will have like one species they mainly work with. Like Aaron, for example, got his blue-tongued skink from a breeder who works like exclusively with blue-tongued skinks, and so when you go to his booth, it's all blue-tongued skinks. When you have someone who's working with wild-caught reptiles, or they, you know, they're an importer of them and they buy them and sell them at expos, they have tons of different kinds of reptiles. And the thing is, if you are concerned at all that your reptile or amphibian or whatever might be wild-caught, all you have to do is ask. I have done this at an expo before, not because I was going to buy a wild-caught one, but because I was fairly certain that's what was going on. And I just walked up to them and I said, are these captive bred or wild-caught? And they said wild-caught. They will disclose the information to you, so don't be afraid to ask. Now, if you notice that you go to one booth and let's just use a red-eyed crocodile skink, for example, because there are wild-caught and captive-bred ones in expos. So say you go to an expo and you're looking for a red-eyed crocodile skink, and one booth has them for, I'm just gonna pick a number. I don't know how much they cost because I've never bought one at an expo. Say there's one for $200, and then there's one for $150. The one that's $150 might be wild-caught because it's cheaper than the one at the other booth, which might be captive-bred. Well, it's most likely captive-bred. And again, all you have to do is ask, but a lot of times on the deli cup or the container that they're in, they will also have the letters CB or WC. CB being captive-bred and WC being wild-caught. So even if you have a suspicion and you don't want to ask, it should be on the cup, and if it's not, I recommend that you ask. So again, what you want to look for are a few things, which would be the wild-caught label on the lid. You can always ask if it's wild-caught, the discount in price, the familiarity of the breeder, like so they have a big banner, they've come to the show many times, or they're like trying to advertise themselves, so if they have like some sort of company name. And then the last one would be the selection of reptiles that they have, because again, Ones that are wild caught, they'll typically have like a bunch because they just buy them and then bring them to the expo. They're not ones that they actively work with in a captive breeding scenario. Now you may be thinking, I don't really care if it comes from the wild, I'm cool with that. And while we have to agree to disagree on that one, you have to take into consideration that even if you don't care about the fact that it came from the wild and now you want to keep it as a pet, you have to think about the fact that it's going to cost a lot of money and may end up dying on you. So if you buy a wild caught animal, chances are it's not going to thrive in captivity. A lot of them don't. A lot of them don't live when they're purchased, and a lot of them don't live before they're even purchased. And you have to consider, is that something that you want to support? Would you like to buy a reptile and then have it die on you or spread disease to your other reptiles? Or would you rather have to get a captive bred one that you are less likely going to have that type of problem with? That decision is going to have to be up to you, but one of them sounds like, oh, I'm supporting a person who actively, you know, keeps these reptiles and will have a lot of experience. If I have any problems, then I can talk to them. This animal probably won't come to me sick, and I'll pay like a little bit more for it at the expo. Whereas you have the wild caught one, which you may pay less for at the expo, but you can't talk to that importer. They're not going to know anything about that animal, and they're not going to be able to tell you how to care for it. And you're also probably going to get a sick animal, which could cost you hundreds to thousands in vet bills, or if you don't take it to the vet, it'll probably just die on you, or it'll spread something to all of your other reptiles. So that's just something to consider. I always advise against buying wild caught reptiles, and this is not just at expos, but there are people online like LLL Reptiles and oh, what's the other one? Backwater Reptiles, Backwater, I don't know, it's one of those, but they, alongside LLL Reptile, and of course there's other ones, but those are like the two names I always see thrown about when people are looking to get a reptile. Those ones sell wild caught animals, so if you don't want a wild caught animal, don't buy from them. Now the second part of this video is going to be about problematic morphs, and this is going to be controversial, perhaps not as controversial as the last one, which is about hybrids, but I feel very passionately about this, even more so than I feel about wild caught animals, because people are often okay with buying problematic morphs or supporting people who breed these problematic morphs because they're captive bred and there's no laws prohibiting against it. So let me just simmer down a little bit and just tell you why it's probably not a good idea to support anyone who sells problematic morphs and why it's a good idea not to buy them. First, let's talk about what problematic morphs are. So for leopard geckos, there's lemon frost leopard geckos, which have cancerous tumors. I'll include a video up here about it. There's Enigma leopard geckos who have a neurological disorder, and everybody and their mother is gonna say, oh my god, this person said that they have a pure line of Enigma or they have a pure line of lemon frost and none of the offspring have ever had a tumor or a neurological. This is a lie. This is a lie. They are trying to get you to buy their reptile. Do not believe this. I have literally seen this firsthand when someone said, my line doesn't have any Enigma, and literally the great-grandchildren still have Enigma Syndrome. I have Shireen, and I have seen her offspring, and her offspring, and her offspring. And throughout all the generations, they each have different varying degrees of Enigma Syndrome. I've seen it firsthand. So when someone is trying to tell you that their gecko, it doesn't have this problem that's associated with all the others, I have the pure line, it doesn't exist. This is just them trying to sell an animal to you and them trying to justify it being okay to exploit a diseased or afflicted animal like that. Anyways, simmer down, simmer down. So Enigma Syndrome, I'll include a video up here about it. I mentioned lemon frost already. Then there's also the white and yellow morph, which some lines do have a neurological problem. And I have two geckos that have white and yellow syndrome. It's quite different from Enigma Syndrome, but it definitely is neurological. And again, it's really tricky because some lines do have white and yellow, and there have been successful white and yellow lines bred without it. It's not like Enigma. The research behind white and yellow syndrome, they're not sure if it's caused by like certain reptiles in the beginning that had been bred together so much they had become inbred, and that line is what had created the syndrome, or if it's something that's inherently related to it. But there are breeders such as Gecko, for example, that have white and yellow lines, and they've kept the generations to make sure that they don't, like, they had the grandparents and then the parents and then the offspring and then those offspring. And if they ever notice that any of them develop white and yellow, they would just cut them straight from the breeding program. The problem is a lot of people who keep white and yellow don't care about the syndrome or don't familiarize themselves with the slightest of signs, and then they'll just breed that gecko saying it doesn't have white and yellow or not caring that it does, and then that will further mess up the other pools of white and yellow out there. So if you're gonna get a white and yellow, you're gonna have to do it from someone who has a good reputation. Now again, if you ask someone if they have a line of white and yellow that doesn't have any sort of syndrome, you might get lied to. So I would probably just avoid that one entirely. Outside of geckos, there are some snake morphs that have problems, and you see this a lot in like ball pythons. I know there's like the spider ball python is the most popular one, but I know there's a bunch of others, and I don't keep snakes, so I don't have any experience with problematic snake morphs. I just know that the spider ball python, it suffers just like Enigmas do in terms of its ability to function, and so you should not support that. And the same would be said for any other of the problematic snake morphs, of which there are tons of videos out there. In fact, this year the spider ball python was like a huge conversation thanks to good old Brian. But it's just a really big topic, and you can find tons of videos out there if you're interested in them. Again, I'm sorry, I don't keep snakes, so I can't offer any assistance with that. Another example of a problematic morph would be a silkback bearded dragon, and this is because they are supposed to have thick scales, like they're supposed to have them, and when you breed an animal to not have them, it's gonna have repercussions. So they burn easily, they don't shed well, it's generally just a discomforting thing, and so I would not support that either. And then there's also scaleless snakes, which along the same line, like the scales are there for a reason. There's no reason to take away from what it naturally is. I have seen other people talk about scaleless snakes. Again, I don't keep snakes, so I can't speak to this one 100%, but I've seen other people talk about it and say that it causes health issues, and so again, if there's even the slightest chance, it's something that I would avoid. So again, I'll list the following ones I mentioned, but there's more out there, and it's going to take research on your part because there's no way I could cover it all in one video. I find new ones all the time, unfortunately. So first and foremost, we have the lemon frost leopard gecko, which develops cancerous tumors in their pigment, so it's not like it's something you can avoid. And then there are Enigma leopard geckos, which have neurological disorders. There are the white and yellow, which also have neurological problems. There's the scaleless snake. There's the spider ball python, along with tons of other ball python morphs. And then there's also silkback bearded dragons. Again, I've only covered such a small amount here, but problematic morphs in general are going to be what you want to avoid. So if it's your first time at an expo, take a look around. If you see a morph that particularly draws to your eye, just do a quick Google search and like type in something like problems or syndrome or like effects afterwards, and if anything comes up, then you know that it's a problematic morph. It's a very simple Google search to do, and things like spider ball python, there's been so many videos and articles. Enigma, there's so much about Enigma Syndrome out there, and if you are ever like not sure if it's a problematic morph, you can ask the breeder. Again, they may lie to you, but a lot of breeders will say, oh yes, this morph is known for having a syndrome, but mine doesn't. And if they say, but mine doesn't, then it's gonna have to be up to you whether or not you want to support that. I think that if you support a breeder who breeds lemon frost, enigmas, whatever, even if you don't buy that type of gecko and you buy another gecko from them, you're supporting their ability to keep breeding problematic morphs, and I think that's a really dangerous thing to do. And I just, as a person who has so many disabled geckos and who has seen like the negative effects of greed when it comes to like the reptile industry and breeding, it's just not something that I can ever say is a good idea to support, and I will always speak out against it. Now, if you're wondering how you can tell whether or not it's an Enigma or a silkback bearded dragon, the people will tell you. Like, it should be listed on the deli cup or whatever you buy the reptile in, because that is going to drive up the price. There are people who want to make more money, so they'll put Enigma on the cup if it's an Enigma. Like, they're gonna tell you, because some people are out there looking for Enigmas and some people just come across an Enigma and there's gonna be a higher price tag on an Enigma because they look visually stunning compared to other geckos. That's the problem with them being bred. Oh, it's so annoying. But anyways, you'll know because it'll say it on the cup, and if it doesn't say a morph on the cup, don't buy from that breeder. That breeder is just selling you, who knows, they're just selling you like a morphless species. Like, you do not want to have an animal from a breeder if they can't properly tell you what morph it is. And everybody's gonna make mistakes, and that's okay. But this video hopefully will help somebody who's either been to Expos a ton or it's their first time, just like navigate what to avoid. So the very final thing we'll talk about are hybrids. Now, hybrids is controversial. Some people on this platform think hybrids are fine, and some people are very against hybrids, and that's just in the whole reptile industry, not just on YouTube. The problem with hybrids is that they can mess up lines of captive bred animals. So like, we'll use the Chihuahua gecko and the crested gecko for an example. So the crested gecko is a different species of gecko from Chihuahua. Now, somebody realized they could breed together and their offspring would be a hybrid, a mix of the two. Now, if you take that gecko and you breed it back to a crested gecko, the offspring might look like really crested gecko-y, right? Crested gecko-y. But if you take that baby and then breed it again, you're just gonna continue polluting a line of pure crested geckos. So the idea behind it is we want to keep crested geckos breeding with crested geckos, and if you introduce a gecko that looks just like a crested gecko but has partial genetics from a Chihuahua, then you're gonna mess up that lineage, and that's dangerous, and it's not something that a lot of people appreciate in the breeding world. Supporting someone who breeds hybrids or buying a hybrid is gonna be totally up to you, but I figured I should include it because a lot of people have a problem with them existing. I have not been aware of hybrids having health problems because there's not that many people who keep hybrids. However, I can imagine it definitely being a thing because, well, it's not really supposed to happen. You know, crested geckos are supposed to breed with crested geckos and Chihuahuas are supposed to breed with Chihuahuas. So again, this one is a little bit controversial because everyone feels a bit differently, and I'm not as passionate about it as I am when it comes to problematic morphs or like wild-caught reptiles. But like I said, I figured I should include it in the video. Okay, that's everything I have to say, I think. Hopefully I did some justice when it comes to what to avoid when it comes to Expos in terms of reptiles at the very least. I hope that nobody gets too offended by this because like everybody has a different opinion. If you want to keep wild-caught reptiles, like, do you, but that's just not what I can promote and agree with. So I'm going to use my voice on my channel as I see fit. And if you don't like it, you do not have to subscribe. But if you do like it, I would like you to subscribe, and I would like to keep seeing you here on this channel. And hit the notification bell, the like, all that kind of stuff. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!